Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best mid laners for patch 6.12. So first up is going to be Victor. Victor right now is probably your best choice if you are looking for a mid lane champion who does scale really well into the late game. He does have great one-shot potential once he does get a few items. His EQ combo, if it's off on a squishy target, say the enemy AD carry or the enemy mid laner, you can practically one-shot them, and if that's not enough damage to one-shot them, then you just drop down your ultimate. So I feel like Victor is just a really strong scaling mid lane champion. He's got really good wave clear as well with his E. I would definitely recommend upgrading your E first because it just allows you to basically one-shot the wave with your E, and it just makes his wave clear really strong. He's got great zoning potential as well in teamfights with his W. If you are taking Dragon or Baron with Victor, then be sure to place your W down so that the enemies can't come towards you and they can't engage on you. He also does a lot of AoE damage with his E and his ultimate, and his mobility in teamfights is pretty good as well once he does get his Q upgraded. A few cons to Victor are that he does not have any mobility in the early game. When I am playing him up against a heavy CC enemy comp, I do like to take Cleanse instead of something like Heal or Barrier because I feel like you do just need to survive in the early game as Victor. You need to scale up and get your items, and if you end up dying to the enemy jungler when they do come to gank, then you're not going to be as useful as some of the other mid lane champions. So just take Cleanse if you are going up against a heavy CC enemy comp, and his E can be a little bit hard to land if you're new to Victor. Next up is going to be my personal favorite mid lane champion right now, and that champion is Velkoz. So I think it was patch 6.11, Velkoz ultimate got reverted back to the way it was before he got his rework. It will now stack his passive and it will now deal true damage without you having to land your other abilities. So I think that because of this change, he's just really sleeper OP right now, and he's definitely a very strong pick in the mid lane. He does a ton of true damage because of his passive. If you can get your full combo off on the enemy squishy or even like on an enemy tank, you just deal so much damage because of that true damage from your passive. He does a lot of AoE damage as well in teamfights. All of his abilities are AoE abilities, so it just allows you to get so much damage off with Velkoz. He's got pretty good crowd control in his kit too, with the slow on his Q and the knock up or the knockback on his E. He does have a very strong early to mid game. This is where you want to just be aggressive with Velkoz. If you do get ahead in the laning phase, then just look to teamfight and look to get your damage off in those teamfights because that is where Velkoz is at his best. He's got great wave clear too with his W. He's a longer ranged mid lane champion. I find myself not really dying too often when I play Velkoz because in teamfights you just sit back, use your Q whenever it's up, and use your ultimate if you do see the squishies caught out of position. And another thing that I think is very underrated about Velkoz is that he does have a very smooth auto attack animation, so it just makes it very easy to CS with him in my opinion. One con to Velkoz is that he does not have a gap closer, so like I said with Victor, if the enemy team does have a heavy CC comp, then taking Cleanse is never a bad idea. Next up is going to be another one of my favorite picks right now, and that pick is Anivia. So Anivia just does so much damage with two abilities being her ultimate and her E. Once you do get your items on Anivia, if you can just throw your ultimate down on the enemy and get the E off when they are slowed, they're going to be chunked to below half HP, like way below half HP if they are a squishy target. And I think that just because that combo is so easy to use and it's such an effective combo, I think Anivia is a great pick right now for mid lane. She also does have very strong crowd control in her kit with her ultimate and her Q. Her zoning potential is probably some of the best for any mid lane champion in the game. She's got her wall, and then she also has her ultimate, so it's just really hard to get. Say if you're taking Baron or say if you're taking Dragon, the enemy team is going to have a very hard time getting to you because you can use your wall to block them off, you can use your ultimate to slow, so she's just got a very strong zoning kit. She also does have insane single target damage. Once you do get used to landing your ult E combo on Anivia and getting used to the range on that, then you can be very successful on her. She can also bait really easily in the laning phase with her egg. Never be afraid to go aggressive with Anivia, especially if you are playing around your tower, because if you do end up picking up the kill, then you're going to get a nice snowball going, and even if you do end up popping your egg, as long as you're near your tower, then the enemy probably isn't going to end up killing you. And she does also have insane wave clear with her ultimate and her Q. A few cons to her are that she does not have a gap closer, and she is also a little bit harder to play in my opinion than some of the other mid lane champions. Next up is going to be Swain. So Swain, it does look like he's getting a pretty big nerf in 6.13 to his ultimate. His ultimate is getting increased. The cooldown of it's going up to 30 seconds from 10. So I think if you're thinking about buying Swain, then I would kind of hold off on buying him right now until 6.13 drops. But if you do already own him, then in 6.12 he is still a great pick for the mid lane. He's got a very strong early to mid game. Once you do get Rod and Zhonya's on Swain, then you can just start absolutely stomping in team fights. If the enemy does try to focus you and they jump on you, then you can get your damage off, pop Zhonya's, and if there's a few enemies near you, you're going to be healing for quite a bit with your ultimate, so that just makes Swain's team fight very strong. He's also got very versatile build paths, and this is another reason why I do like him quite a bit. If your team is lacking some tank, then you can go Rod, Zhonya's, and then you can go full tank after that. You can get something like a Spirit Visage, and you can even get some tanky armor items if you need to. But if your team is lacking damage, then you can just go Glass Cannon Swain, and you can still do really well. He's got pretty good crowd control in his kit too, with his Q and his W, and he's just such a hard champion to kill once you do get to those late game team fights. His late game is just absolutely insane, so if you're thinking about picking up Swain this patch, then I would still recommend it for sure. And a few cons to him are that his W can be hard to hit at first, since you do have to predict where the enemies are moving to be able to hit it, and he also is a champion who does not have a gap closer. I would not recommend taking Cleanse on Swain though. I would recommend going more aggressive for something like Ignite when you are playing him, because you don't really need Cleanse once you get to those mid to late game team fights, since if you do end up getting caught out by like a Thresh Hook, then you can pop your Zhonya's, and if you are at late game Swain, then even if you do get hooked or even if you do get cut out, you're probably going to be able to turn that team fight and just get a lot of damage off. And to round out the top 5 for this patch, I have Malzahar. So right now, I'm really not sure why Malzahar isn't seeing more play. He's only at around like a 3 or 4% pick rate this patch, but he's only banned 30% of the time now, so you can still play Malzahar. I think people are just kind of forgetting that he's still a really strong pick. Zed still does have like an 85% ban rate, but Malzahar's ban rate is really low, so if he is not banned right now, then I would definitely recommend picking him up. Even though he did get a few little nerfs, he is still a really strong pick for the mid lane. He does a load of consistent damage while also being able to deal burst damage, and this is the main reason why he's just such a strong pick for the mid lane. A lot of mid lane champions either do good burst damage or they do good consistent damage. For example, LeBlanc, she's all burst, but she doesn't have consistent damage, whereas Malzahar can do both of those things, which just makes him a great pick right now. He is also a very strong pick against enemy assassin champions, so if the enemy team does lock someone like a LeBlanc or a Zed, then Malzahar is a great pick in that situation, because if they try to dive on the back line in a team fight, you can just use your ultimate and they're pretty much completely useless. He's a pretty simple champion to play too. The only hard thing really about Malzahar's kit is landing his Q, because it is a skill shot. Other than that, he doesn't have any other skill shot, so he's just a fairly easy champion to play for the mid lane. His level 6 all-in is great as well, especially if you do take Ignite. If you do get a bunch of your little minions down, I'm not sure what they're called exactly, but if you get a bunch of your W's active, then you're going to deal a lot of damage if you do use your ultimate on the enemy mid lane champion. And he can also survive really well in the late game team fights. His passive is on around like a 5 or 6 second cooldown, I'm pretty sure, once you do get to that late game, so it's just so hard to catch out a Malzahar once you do get to the late game. And a few cons to Malz are that he does not have a gap closer, but this really isn't the biggest deal for him because he does have his passive, so it's going to be really hard for the enemies to land a CC ability on him, especially if it is in the late game, because his passive is only on like a 5 or 6 second cooldown, and his Q can be a little bit hard to hit at first. So first up on the honorable mentions, I have Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate is one of the best snowball mid lane champions. Once you do hit level 6 as him, look to get roams off with your ultimate. If you can get your bot lane going or get your top lane going, then you can definitely look to end the game before the 25-minute point as TF. If you don't end up getting ahead though in the early game, then he is going to be a little bit weaker than some of the other mid. Next up is going to be Annie. So Annie is probably the simplest and the most effective pick for mid lane if you are either new to mid lane or if you don't play it a whole lot. She's just got a very simple combo, being her Tibbers into her Q and her W. It's really a foolproof combo and you can't really mess mess up on using it too often. Her flash, Tibbers, and Gauge is also very strong once you do get to those mid to late game team fights, so if you're looking to play Annie, then I would definitely recommend it for sure. Next up is Fizz. So even though Fizz did get that nerf this patch, it really doesn't seem like it's affecting him too much for the mid lane. He does still have that great single target burst damage, and he is still a very hard champion to deal with once you do get to those mid to late game team fights, because his E is still on a relatively short cooldown. It's only on like a 1 second longer cooldown if you do have 40% CDR, so overall Fizz is still a great assassin pick. Next up, I have Ahri. So Ahri has been on my top 5 for probably the past few months for mid lane, and this is the first time she's been on the honorable mentions in a very long time. Now the reason why she's on the honorable mentions for this patch is mainly because the picks in the mid lane right now, being like Malz, Anivia, and Swain, they're just too strong in my opinion, and I feel like the reason why Ahri is on the honorable mentions is just because the other picks are too broken right now and they're too strong that Ahri is still a good pick, but the other champions are just at another level right now. So Ahri, if you can get a good snowball going in the early game, then you can definitely carry very hard with her. Her charm is a great pick ability, and if you can land that consistently, then you can definitely be very successful on Ahri. Next up is Kennen. So I think that Kennen is really sleeper OP right now for both the top lane and the mid lane. He's been kind of my go-to pick right now if I just need to get a win in. Now the reason why I think Kennen is a strong pick is because his team fight is just absolutely crazy. If he does have his flash up and he does buy Proto Belt, then he's pretty much guaranteed to get onto that back line and get a lot of damage off. So I just think that because Kennen does have one of the best team fights for any champion in the game, he is a great pick for mid lane. And lastly, to round out the honorable mentions, I have Brand. So Brand is also a very strong teamfight mid lane champion. He's got a load of AoE damage coming out from his ultimate and his W. As long as you can get to your core items of Rod, Leandries, and Rylai's on Brand, then you can definitely start to do some work. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.